So, ganun ang kinalabasan ng communicative-based approach, okay? Kasi that time, Noam Chomsky was really popular and highly influential, okay? So they believe that language learners should be able to use the functional use of language. That is basically communicative approach, okay? You have the speech acts, you have commissives, directives. So alam niyo yung na-mention kanina, the pragmatic side of the language. So the student should be able to know how to use that. And this is also included in the three-dimensional grammar framework, which is the pragmatic use, okay? So this is the opportunity for students to really learn those things, okay? The function aspect of the language, okay? So although we have the thing about communicative based approaches that that will be part of the inadequacy, okay, because some researchers or many researchers really found, okay, CLT or communicative approach as inadequate then. Kasi at that time it was really influential too after Chomsky's conceptualization or characterization of linguistic competence. Naging popular din naman siya, as in totally popular. But the thing about this one is that there are really no established instructional procedures associated with communicative approach, okay? Yun yung pinaka indicator niya. There's no really established instructional procedure how to really implement it. It highly emphasized, meaning focused language in teaching. Okay, so I guess that you were able to also know that the communicative approach has two versions, the strong and the weak version. So the strong version has something to do with meaning focus, that is the use of emotional, functional, syllabus, or task-based instruction. That is a strong, okay, strong version. Meaning to say, for the strong version, language is learned through communication, okay? So that is the strong version. Language is learned through communication, and it is, of course, considered as the best way of teaching a language, and that is through activities that are exclusively meaning focused, okay? In other words, communication is both the goal and the means of instruction here. Again, communication is both the goal and the means of language instruction for the strong version of communicative language teaching, okay, being classified as a communicative approach, okay. So the weak version, on the other hand, is its goal or its end goal is to, of course, use communication, okay, but learners can learn language in more controlled manner, okay, by using and practicing it in communicative, of course, communicative context pa din. But there is this use of mechanical drills in communicative situations. So like, for example, reading conversational scripts, and students take roles, okay? Take roles and take turns of the roles. So it's more controlled because it's really like the learning, okay? The very conscious way of learning the language. It's weak kasi remember, it's the weak version kasi remember that the main contention of communicative approach is to really use language for communication in through real world tasks, okay? So meaning to say there should be the use of mechanical drills are really discouraged, or controlled practice are really discouraged in classrooms, okay? So that's why it's the weak version if you follow or apply controlled practice or controlled manner of using the language, okay? Again, the ano pa rin dito naman, the goal is still communication, pero it's just realized or implemented in a controlled manner, okay? So you have to also take note that strong version of this communicative approach underlies much of the earlier meaning-focused methods. So then before, it was also emphasized that language functions are the key organizing principles of language pedagogy. So that's why it's notional functional, notional functional syllabus. For example, purchasing, buying, buying. So these are the language functions. So they are, as well as the organizing principles of the language pedagogy. Yung mga greetings, request, apologies, okay? And also the process-based syllabus then before. Parang similar lang din sila that really emphasize the language functions. Also, ang communicative approach followed content-based, okay? Content-based kind of syllabus. When you say content-based, it's like it's also like a sort of an immersion type of model, meaning to say that students learn other content aside from learning the language. Okay, so that is content-based. So that's still part of the strong version of the communicative approach. Okay, so here kasi they don't simply learn the English language or the structures of the language, but also they learn other content like science, biology. Okay, they can do that in camping activities. Yes, there's yes, Michael.
Miss, may I share something, Miss?
Yes.
I've read an article authored by Kumara Vadivelo. This
Yeah.
article was introduced to us by
Kumarava de
Dr.
Velu is Kumarava de Velu is the proponent of the post method era.
Yes, Miss. This, I mean, I'm not sure if he's a male or she's a female, but
He's male. He's
he's,
Indian. Kumarava
I'm
de
sorry,
Velu
Miss.
is Indian. He's
Okay.
male.
Okay, so his article tackled the significant paradigm shifts in the past 15 years in the world or in the field of TESOL, the teachers of English to speakers of other languages. There were three language shifts, significant shifts he introduced in this article, and one of which is from communicative language teaching to task-based language teaching. As you've mentioned, Miss, content-based language teaching is um is how do I say this, is a variation under communicative language
Mm,
teaching. And apart from content based, this we also have this task based language teaching, which is, as mentioned now, is a strong version, which is a counterpart of content based language teaching. Skehan 1998, in the article cited by Kumara Vadivelo, he referred to two extremes of task orientation. In giving tasks, there should be two orientations. We have the structure-oriented tasks and the communicatively oriented tasks. The structure-oriented tasks emphasizes form to the detriment of meaning. On the other hand, communicative task is more focused on meaning rather than the form. However, Skehan also emphasized that the teacher should strike a balance between form and meaning and an alternation of attention between them. Kumara Vadivelo, in this particular shift, proposed three-part classification of language teaching methods. They are language-centered tasks, second, learner-centered tasks, and the third is learning-centered tasks. In language-centered tasks, these are tasks that draw learners' attention primarily to linguistic forms. So this is similar to structure-oriented tasks. The second one is learner-centered tasks, wherein students, or these are tasks that direct the learner's attention to formal as well as functional properties. So these learner-centered tasks coincide to Skehan's second orientation, that is a communicatively oriented tasks, which pertain to the application of the language item or the linguistic item learned. The third proposed classification of language teaching method by Kumara Vadivelu is the learning-centered tasks, which are those tasks that engage the learner mainly in the negotiation, interpretation, and expression of meaning without any explicit focus on form. So I believe that this is where pragmatic side of task-based language teaching enters, because primarily task-based language teaching adheres to pragmatic rather than semantic meaning. As language teachers, we do not confine our learners, the knowledge that the lesson that we teach our learners, to what we can measure overtly, but we also have this assumption that there are learnings that teachers could not overtly measure but covertly observe in the learners performance in school, or perhaps interaction together with his or her peers. So more like a share, Miss. Thank you, Miss.
Yes. Um, Kumarava Develu is also really popular, especially that he contended the notion of post-method era. Okay, welcome back to my channel. Please turn on your cameras. Okay, so I was just saying earlier after Villanueva shared about the article that he read. Um, it's Komarava Develu's article. Feel grateful that you have a copy of that because the only teacher I gave a copy of that is Miss Moffat, and you cannot download that from any journals out there because it's paid article, especially that's TESOL Quarterly. TESOL Quarterly is one of those dominant or leading or frontliners in English language teaching. Kaya basahin nyo yan at i-keep nyo yan. And Kumarava Develu writes very good articles, and he's the author of the proponent of post-method era. So when you say post-method era, it's the eksena after the method era. Okay? So sabi nila, okay, ang daming method. So ano ba talaga ang best method? And then they always contend that there's no best method, okay, to really use. Not even the communicative language teaching because it has a lot of loopholes or downsides. Not even the grammar-based approaches alone because they have their own downsides as well. But of course, you can think of their advantages as well. So, ano bang dapat isipin natin? Ano bang dapat gawin when it comes to English language teaching? Ayon, si Kumarava Develu ang initiate na, okay, let's call it post-method era. Okay, when you say post-method era, let's be more eclectic. Okay? Yung term na principled eclecticism, it's related to the post-method era that you need to strike a balance. Okay, between and from the different perspectives and orientations when it comes to how language teaching should be implemented. Should we just focus on or employ grammar-based approaches or communicative-based approaches, or a combination of the two? And then you have the recent developments informed by the different studies in the different areas of applied linguistics. So it's because it's going to be applied linguistics studies that will really inform the traditional ways of teaching the language or solving real world language related problems. So I was also about to say that the communicative language teaching or communicative approach is also motivated by the task-based instruction, which Villanueva already discussed earlier from Kumarava Develu's article. Okay, so basically that approach is this approach is motivated by the more recent task-based language instruction, and it assumes that central to language learning are activities or real-life activities that are called tasks. Kaya siya tinatawag na task-based approaches. Task-based instruction or task-based language instruction. And although there are so many different definitions as to the description of task-based language teaching, some would say that, for example, according to Noonan, he considered this as teaching as process, okay? Where the focus is on the process of language use. That's according to Noonan, okay, when it comes to the implementation or the description of task-based language instruction, okay? And I think I have a separate slide for that. So let's first discuss the major inadequacies of communicative-based approaches. So I've mentioned that it really weakened the value of grammar instruction or even the grammar itself because it favors communicative competence, and communicative competence is more on meaning, okay, more on meaning and communication through real world tasks. And there is this misconception that because of the proliferation or the dominance of CLT or communicative approaches, there's this misconception of teachers that students are not really communicative because they were taught, okay, using the traditional approaches or explicit instruction or the deductive way of teaching it. Okay? Kaya sila daw hindi marunong magsalita or they can't really communicate fluently because they were taught using the traditional approaches. That's the belief of the advocates of the communicative-based approaches. Okay? So sila yung mga naninira naman ng mga grammar-based approaches na eksena. Okay? And of course, another major inadequacy of the communicative-based approach is that it has a great focus on meaning, so less attention to grammar. So I mentioned that earlier, okay? But again, accuracy is really required and necessary in communication to avoid misinterpretation or to avoid funny utterances. Like for example, you have, or confusing utterances, like, you know, that there are what we call misplaced modifiers. For example, magiging funny yung sentence or utterance mo if you misplace a modifier before the subject or after the subject or intended subject in the sentence, diba? So you know what that means basically. So SLA research holds that really explicit knowledge of grammar contributes, if not leads to acquisition. So that is a sort of a criticism towards or against communicative-based approaches, okay? Explicit knowledge of grammar is necessary in communication. So there's a need to really teach grammar, okay? Now, I think this is the part where I'm going to mention the task-based approach. That is one of the motivations of the communicative-based approaches, okay? So if you're going to revisit, okay, if you're going to revisit the communicative-based approaches, you have this characterization from Savignon that the development of communicative ability, so research findings overwhelmingly support the integration of form-focused and meaning-focused experience. And this is relative to what Michael mentioned from Komarava-Develou's article. So Savignon is also an advocate of principled eclecticism, that in order for the students to really reach communicative ability or proficiency, that kind of proficiency, the literature is really replete with evidence that the integration of form-focused exercises and meaning-focused exercises or experience should be emphasized in the classroom, okay, or is really important in the mastery of the target language. And so Savignon suggested that the communicative language teaching does not exclude a focus of meta-linguistic awareness, okay, if you come to think of it, okay? Because there is actually no, as I've mentioned earlier, there is no really agreement as to how CLT should be interpreted or realized. So, ang tinatanong nila, when we talk about CLT or communicative-based approach, do we really totally exclude, okay? Do we really totally exclude the attention to form? But no, it's not actually that we have to totally forget about form when we apply or utilize CLT or communicative language teaching. It's just that the interpretation, the general interpretation of communicative competence is using the language for communication. No attention to grammar. Yun yung pinaka-general interpretation. But actually, when you review it, it's not actually like that. Okay? So it does not include it does not exclude a focus on meta-linguistic awareness or knowledge of the rules or syntax. And she even pointed out that traditional activities such as you have the dictation, you have translation of texts, and memorization can be really helpful in bringing attention to form. Okay, so in order for students to really accurately give utterances, then they have to really give attention to form. Okay, and so this has something to do with the three-dimensional framework now as to how to really incorporate a focus on grammar into meaningful communication. Okay, I've taught that already. And then, of course, the concept of grammaring, wherein it's a process whereby the learner becomes able to make use of grammar communicatively, accurately, and appropriately. Okay, so that is it. So in relation to task-based approach, yes, Komarava-Develou contends that there must be a balance. Okay, there must be a balance between a focus on grammar forms and a focus on communication. And he suggested those three, okay, three different methodologies. Like for example, and actually there are many pa to complement that. You have the language centered, the learner centered, and what's the other one that you mentioned, Villanueva?
Learning centered, Miss.
Yes, learning centered. Meron din tayong performance based, okay, teaching, which is also related to task based instruction. So we focus on the the performance. Meron din class-centered teaching in relation to language teaching. So maraming nagko-complement after Comarava Develu started the principled eclecticism. Okay? And so for for task-based approach, again, he was right in saying that this is also the strong version of CLT. And the goal of the goal of second language task-based pedagogy should be the three. One is accuracy, two, complexity, and fluency. So you can easily define accuracy as really the ability to really use the language accurately, okay? How well language is produced, that's accuracy. And for complexity, it's basically like a sort of the ambition or the elaboration of the language which is produced. Like for example, how simple the person makes use of the language first and then becomes more complex, meaning to say that it's not just simple sentence, but it has many. For example, in written form, you can observe that there are so many intervening sentences that make the whole idea very complex sometimes, or confusing, diba? Especially in law. You have so many comma, like a sort of a disclaimer kind of thing before the entire sentence is finished. Okay, so that is the level of complexity in law. And by the way, I forgot to mention that grammar before was really linked to the study of other disciplines that require high grammatical ability, like for example, law, medicine, and theology. So, di ba, pag nag-theology ka, dapat marunong ka talaga mag-English or umintindi ng English, di ba? So, they have that kind of contention because grammar is really required to develop rhetorical skills. Kaya grammar was really important back then kasi it was highly linked to the learning of the major disciplines like law, theology, and medicine. Okay? So, going back, we have the fluency. Of course, I think you know what fluency is. It simply means the ability to produce the language, okay, without undue pausing or hesitation. So also Skehan, as I've mentioned Skehan before, he's also an advocate, okay, of the idea that the effective L2 instruction should really strike a balance between these goals, okay? You have accuracy, complexity, and fluency. So, pare-pareho na sila ng mga eksena, okay? Yung iba lang talaga, alam nyo, yung nabasa ko na lahat, hindi naman lahat. I mean, majority of the good books that I've read from Routledge, we have Benjamin's, and you also have Cambridge. If you analyze their definitions, magkapare-pareho lang talaga. Binabago lang talaga nilang pangalan. Parang ganon ang eksena. Okay, so here we have the proposal of Willis 1996 in the implementation of task-based approach. You should have pre-task cycle, task cycle, and language-focused cycle. So ito yung pinaka-procedure according to Willis, okay? When you follow the task-based framework, okay? This is somehow similar to the grammar-based PPP model, okay? With difference that the order of the meaning-based and form-based activities is reversed, okay? So for Willis, for the pre-task cycle, you expose, okay? For the pre-task cycle phase or pre-task phase, there is this goal to expose students to the task or prepare them to carry out the task, okay? So activity ang nauuna or task, okay? Activities such as using pictures, you have implementation of brainstorming, and highlighting vocabulary in the text, etc. So we start with a task. Again, the thing about task-based instruction is that central to language learning are activities called tasks. Okay, kaya task talaga siya nagsisimula.